of your body.
All you need is love. All you need is love.
Hello everybody, this is Tico, and this is a new series on WeTico called All Rock Central. Hello, Mr. Punk.
Hello.
So, what are we here to talk about?
Well, I personally would like to discuss a legendary band known as the Beatles, and discuss what we like about them, what we don't, and ultimately if they really deserve credit they get. You know?
Well,
Hi, everybody. My name is Mr. Punk.
Yeah. It's kind of ironic since the Beatles aren't punk, but whatever. Anyways. So, the Beatles, one of the most influential bands of all time, or are they? The Beatles were a very popular band in the 60s, spanning from 62 to 70, and they've released 13 albums, 12 if you don't count the Let It Be album, and they are deemed as the most influential band of all time. Now, let me sit here and tell you that's complete bull. Well, take other bands that were popular in the 60s. Mr. Punk, name some. Any. Even ones you don't like.
Other popular bands from the 60s.
Yeah.
A popular band from the 60s, I would have to say, would be The Doors.
Let's name some earlier ones. The Beach Boys, the Monkees, the Animals, the Zombies.
The Who.
The Who, the Rolling Stones. All of these bands, I have to say, well, most of them, have been more influential than the Beatles. The only thing, and this is coming from a guy who loves the Beatles, they are my favorite band, but they are also the most overrated band. So, I say that they didn't do much for music, as people say they do. Sure, they make great music, and they're remembered for that, but they don't have a distinctive style. Unless you count the earlier songs, and you could always tell it's the Beatles. But if you go into their later songs, I wouldn't really recognize them unless I heard the song before. So, and the Rolling Stones, they have a distinctive style. Mick Jagger's voice.
As you could see, the Beatles did do very creative techniques, you know. They used and they popularized the growing genre known as psychedelic rock, but in actuality, they weren't as good as people said because they never really invented a genre. You know, I mean, they started out as like a boy band, really, doing 50s music, like, type music. And as they were doing that, other bands started emerging and doing different things, like the Kinks did hard rock. And then, not speaking of hard rock, it's debatable whether or not Helter Skelter was the first metal song. What do you think of that?
I don't think it's heavy metal at all, but I could say it's a prototype with a harder type of music for the entry of metal.
Well, heavy metal, I think, is a lot heavier than that. I would say it was the hardest hard rock song of the time, but I wouldn't even go as far as to call it proto-metal. But they made some very good songs. Like, that one tune, what was the name of it? Yesterday was very good.
Blackbird, it's on their White Album. But yeah, so yeah, we're gonna get hated for this. Sorry guys, but anyways. Okay, so so most of their songs do sound, not most, no, a minority of their songs will sound similar. That I could agree on. And remember, this is coming from a guy who is the Beatles are my favorite band, so, of all time. So, let's see.
I would say their psychedelic stuff is very good. good. There is more to that, and there are other stuff and more experimental stuff. Like, let's say
Come on, everyone.
Eleanor Rigby is creative and good, but I wouldn't say they are as experimental or as good as one of my favorite bands, the Velvet Underground. I find them a lot better, but this isn't about my personal taste. This is unbiased. Let's see. A popular discussion. Do you think the Beatles are similar to a band known as One Direction?
No, okay, no, no, okay, not at all.
What are your thoughts on the Beatles versus the Stones?
Beatles versus the Stones. Well, this is all a matter of opinion. Put them side by side. You can say whatever you want about them. The Rolling Stones had a bigger lifespan. The Beatles, they had more psychedelic music and people might say more creative music. The Rolling Stones had more of a harder feel than most of the Beatles songs. Put them side by side. You could pick whatever side you want. In my opinion, it's the Beatles, but don't get me wrong, the Rolling Stones are really good. But in my opinion, I prefer the Beatles.
I say the Beatles are very good, but I prefer the Rolling Stones blues-oriented style more than the Beatles. But there is one instance where I would actually prefer the Beatles to the Stones, and that is with the rivalry of the Sgt. Pepper's and Satanic Majesties album, because when you go into the Satanic Majesties album, it takes its own take on psychedelic rock, but it just doesn't really hit the mark as Sgt. Pepper's did. You know, Sgt. Pepper's was considered the magnum opus, but really, that's the only time. But I would say Exile on Main Street and Let It Bleed are better than every Beatles album, really. So that's my opinion. What do you think of their solo careers?
Well, then you'll have to go 4 parts. So let's talk about Paul McCartney, probably the most famous and the most liked Beatle. He went on the longest, mostly because of his long lifespan on life and his popularity. He never died. He was on the Jimmy Fallon show and all that good stuff. You know, he was famous, and he still is. He going to release or did already release a new album called Surprise Surprise New, which is one of the least creative titles of all time. So, he did very successful. He was very successful, and probably the most liked Beatle for a very good reason. He was the most creative, and he had the most versatility, not only in instruments, but in songs as well. Because George was a limited writer. John, he was good, but all he talked about was just peace and love in all of his songs. Not that that's a problem, but if you're gonna listen to one specific subject through a whole career, that's not going to end well for you. And though it's really sad John Lennon died, I'm kind of happy that he stopped the peace and love feel, and that was only because he died. And George Harrison, he wasn't the same thing, even though people might say that he is more hippie-like than John. He didn't go that way. He went to a psychedelic feel and even a hard rock feel sometimes. But George Harrison, he had a very, very successful solo career, and then I believe he died of cancer in 2001, which is very sad. In my opinion, I think he had the best career. And then we go to Ringo Starr, Richard Starkey. Let's see, Ringo Starr. Probably the least liked Beatle, never was in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and he's not taking autographs anymore. I don't think it's gonna look good for him. I don't really see any news on Ringo Starr. It's either Paul McCartney or Paul McCartney. So Yeah, though that's my opinion on all four Beatles.
And one more thing, Paul McCartney has a new single out. It's called Queenie Eye. I encourage you all to check it out to support Paul McCartney.
Not a sponsor. Paul McCartney does not know who we are. Okay. So, yeah. And, you know, in the end, the Beatles will always stay deemed as the most influential band of all time. So I guess that kind of wraps it up. The Beatles will always stay deemed as most influential band of all time, and every other band probably can't be put for that, what do you call it, rank, because to everybody's opinion, the Beatles did it first. If it wasn't for Beatlemania, nobody would be saying this. And that's about it.
That has been our opinion. Overall, I'd say they're the most overrated band, yet one of the greatest bands, but not even in my top 5. This has been the pros and cons of music with Mautico at Alternative Express, and
Thank you guys for watching, and we will see you next episode.